You ever walk into a place and feel like you don't exist? Not in some poetic metaphorical sense, but truly completely unseen. You're there, you're breathing, you're someone, and yet the world acts like you're nothing. That was Jerome Wilson's reality today. A man who had spent nearly 3 decades building a luxury hospitality empire from the ground up. A visionary, a warrior, a name that meant something in every boardroom from New York to Singapore. And still, as he stood in the opulent marble-clad lobby of one of his own flagship hotels, he was invisible. Not metaphorically, literally. The concierge desk sat under chandeliers imported from Venice. Every piece of polished brass and pristine glass screamed 5-star elegance. Guests walked by in tailored suits and designer heels. Music played softly from hidden speakers. Everything was curated for excellence, except apparently the people. Jerome had chosen this hotel for a reason. Not to indulge in its comfort, he owned better, but because complaints had been flooding in. Not anonymous rumors, but detailed reports from customers and even a few insiders, stories of indifferent service, rude staff, selective hospitality, and he didn't believe in fixing things from afar. He could have sent in a task force, scheduled a performance audit, layered the problem in bureaucracy. But that wasn't how Jerome operated. No, if the rot had set in, he wanted to feel it, smell it, touch it, because only then could he tear it out from the root. So he walked in. No private driver, no tailored suit, no assistant trailing behind with a clipboard. Just jeans, sneakers, and a duffel bag, a guest, nothing more. And he stood there, waiting. The front desk agent was a young woman, early 20s, blonde, scrolling through her phone like the rest of the world could wait. She didn't look up, didn't offer a greeting, didn't acknowledge his existence. Jerome cleared his throat. Nothing. He tapped the desk. Still nothing. Finally, he spoke, keeping his tone level. "Excuse me." The girl, her name tag said Kim, sighed, loudly, as if she were being interrupted during the most critical mission of her life, instead of texting while on shift. She looked up at him, her face barely masking annoyance. Her voice wasn't rude, just completely indifferent. "Yeah. Not welcome. Not how can I help you, just yeah." Jerome didn't flinch. "I have a reservation. Jerome Wilson." Kim gave him a look, one of those fleeting glances people give when they've already decided who you are and where you belong. She turned to the computer, tapped the keyboard like it personally offended her. Nope, don't see it." Jerome raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" She didn't look up. Didn't recheck, just scrolled her phone with one hand, tapped with the other. "Pretty sure." He stood quietly, expression unreadable. This wasn't a glitch, this was deliberate. She'd seen him, judged him, decided, and dismissed. Just like that. He could feel it in her posture, in her unwillingness to even pretend to care. Her body language screamed, "You don't matter, not here, not to me." Jerome gave a slow exhale. "Please check again." She rolled her eyes, audibly, like this was a personal burden. Another lazy tap on the keyboard. Nope, still nothing. "Sorry," she said, but she didn't sound sorry. She sounded bored. Jerome didn't get angry, didn't raise his voice. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and opened the confirmation email. "I have my booking right here." He held it up. Kim barely glanced. "Yeah, well, the system doesn't lie." Jerome gave her a tight smile. "Neither does my damn email." Another sigh, deeper now, more dramatic. "Maybe you made a mistake. It happens. Maybe you booked the wrong location." Jerome tilted his head. "You saying I'm lost?" Kim's mouth curled into a little condescending smirk, the kind that people wear when they think they're smarter than you, but they're too lazy to prove it. "I'm saying, it's an easy mistake to make." Jerome didn't flinch. He'd seen this before, the subtle ways people like her flexed their power, denying service, refusing help, making someone feel small without ever saying a single offensive word. This wasn't about a reservation, this was about how she saw him, and what she didn't see. She didn't see the man who signed the paychecks, she didn't see the man who designed this lobby. She didn't see the man who owned the building she worked in. And that was going to be her biggest mistake. Kim stood behind the desk like she owned the place, one hand on her hip, the other still attached to her phone like it was an extension of her body. She had no idea who she was talking to, and clearly she didn't care. Jerome wasn't angry. Not yet. But there was something dangerous brewing beneath the surface, something cold, calculating, and calm. He kept his voice steady. "You're absolutely sure you don't see a reservation for Jerome Wilson?" Kim didn't even bother lifting her eyes. "Pretty sure, yeah." Jerome watched her, observed the way she avoided eye contact like he was invisible, the way she pretended his email didn't exist, the way her fingers danced across the keyboard with the enthusiasm of a teenager forced to write a book report, and then it clicked. This wasn't incompetence, this was intent. She wasn't just lazy, she wasn't just disinterested. She was gatekeeping. She'd made a snap decision the moment he walked through the door. He doesn't belong here, not because of anything he did, but because of how he looked. And she had decided to erase him literally. Jerome didn't move. He didn't fidget. Instead, he reached slowly into his coat pocket and pulled out a second phone. A black nondescript device. Corporate issue. Direct access to internal systems reserved for executives. He logged in, typed a few commands, and there it was. His reservation, booked, confirmed, deleted. He scrolled down to the activity log, a timestamp, a user ID. His eyes narrowed. He turned the screen so Kim could see. Her name was right there. Deleted by Kim, front desk. Kim blinked. For the first time all night she looked up, really looked. Her eyes flickered to the screen, and just like that the blood drained from her face. Jerome leaned in slightly. His voice dropped into something quieter, heavier. "So tell me, Kim, why did you delete my reservation?" Her mouth opened, then closed. Then opened again. No words came out. Jerome smiled faintly. "Cat got your tongue." She swallowed. I didn't... I just... Save it." The way she flinched when he cut her off, beautiful. He straightened, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and folded his arms across his chest. "You know," he said casually, "you could have just asked me to leave. That would have been honest at least." I didn't mean," she stammered. "No, you meant it," Jerome interrupted, tone flat. "You saw me, judged me, decided I didn't fit the vibe of your precious lobby, and instead of asking questions or doing your job, you hit delete." Kim's face was frozen, half shock, half dread. She looked down at the keyboard like it might offer her an escape route. There wasn't one. Jerome exhaled slowly. "Let me tell you something, Kim. The system doesn't glitch, people do." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the first phone again, and tapped a few buttons. Reservation active, status restored, room reassigned. He looked back up at her. "You know what happens next?" She didn't answer. "Of course you don't." He gave her a final piercing look. "Find me a room. Now." Kim hesitated, hands trembling as they hovered over the keyboard. She began typing slowly at first, then faster, fumbling to keep up with her own panic. Okay, I found a room," she muttered. "Speak up." I found a room, sir." Jerome didn't flinch. "Which one?" She swallowed again. 1427. He paused. His eyes narrowed. He knew that room. Of course he did. Room 1427 was next to the maintenance closet, a dark little box with a view of the dumpster. It was the worst room in the entire hotel, a utility space with curtains. Jerome gave a soft chuckle. "Really, Kim?" Her eyes widened slightly. I didn't mean, do I look like a fool to you?" "No, sir." "Then why are you playing me like one?" Silence, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. The lobby wasn't so busy anymore. A couple on the couch nearby stopped pretending not to listen. A bellboy across the room suddenly found the carpet deeply fascinating. Jerome leaned forward. "Let me explain something to you. I designed this hotel. Every room, every hallway, every inch of this building." He tapped the desk with one finger. "That means I know when someone's trying to insult me." Kim froze. Her face contorted between embarrassment and fear. Jerome slowly reached for the keycard she had pushed across the counter. He didn't take it. He just stared at her, then smiled. "Thanks, Kim." And he walked toward the elevators. But this wasn't over, not even close, because tonight Jerome wasn't just here to book a room. He was here to tear the entire rot out, brick by brick. Jerome entered the room 1427, and closed the door behind him with a quiet finality. He didn't bother to glance at the view. He didn't need to. He already knew what he'd see: a grimy dumpster framed by a cracked alley wall. The hum of the service elevator just outside would sing its mechanical lullaby all night long. This wasn't just a bad room. It was a message, an insult, a passive-aggressive slap from someone who thought they could hide behind anonymity and a name tag. But what Kim didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Jerome wasn't the type to let things slide. Not anymore. He set down his bag, pulled out his laptop, and opened it with the calm precision of a man about to perform surgery. His fingers moved across the keys with fluid familiarity, entering the internal database of the hotel's management system. This was his domain. He didn't just build the empire, he built the tools that kept it running. And now he was going to use them. First stop staff incident reports, a few quick commands, and a flood of documents popped up on his screen. Guest complaints, internal notes, incident logs, all connected to one name: Kim. There she was, like a virus spreading through the system. Front desk agent dismissed guest complaint without logging it. Guest reported racial discrimination during check-in. Agent Kim. A staff member refused service citing hotel policy, but provided no documentation. Multiple system errors tied to Kim's login ID affecting reservations. Each entry was another nail in the coffin. And each one made Jerome's jaw tighten just a little more. This wasn't just someone having a bad day. This wasn't incompetence. This was sabotage. Intentional, targeted, consistent, and worst of all, protected. Because none of these incidents had been escalated. None had led to disciplinary action. Every complaint seemed to hit a wall and disappear. Why? Jerome scrolled further, dug deeper, looked past the surface-level entries and into the hierarchy that kept people like Kim in place. And there it was. Stephen Lane, hotel manager, the corporate puppet with a handshake smile and the spine of a wet noodle. Stephen's name was all over the follow-ups, or lack thereof. Spoke with employee. No further action required. Guest issue resolved, no evidence of misconduct. Advised staff to be more mindful of tone. Jerome shook his head. Stephen hadn't been managing the hotel. He'd been avoiding confrontation, and in doing so, he'd let rot grow beneath polished floors and crystal chandeliers. Jerome closed the laptop. His decision was made. This wasn't just about Kim anymore. This was about accountability. This was about standards, and if Stephen didn't have the guts to enforce them, then Jerome would. He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked back toward the elevator with purpose in every step. When the doors opened, the lobby was still quiet, still tense. The energy hadn't shifted since his last visit. In fact, it had thickened. Whispers, side glances, a low buzz of curiosity that rippled beneath the silence. Jerome didn't break stride. He walked straight past the front desk, ignoring Kim's frantic attempts to avoid eye contact, and pushed open the door to the manager's office without knocking. Stephen Lane looked up from his desk like a child caught drawing on the walls. "Mr. Wilson," he stammered, rising halfway from his seat. "What a surprise. Sit down." Jerome's voice was ice. Stephen froze, then obeyed. Jerome stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and leaned against it with folded arms. "Cut the pleasantries. We need to talk." Stephen nodded nervously, beads of sweat already forming at his temples. "Oh, of course. Is everything okay? You tell me, do you know what's happening at your front desk?" Stephen blinked. I believe so. Yes. Everything's running smooth." "Wrong answer." Jerome's voice cracked like a whip. Stephen swallowed hard. I'm sorry." Jerome took a step forward. "My reservation. Deleted. Not lost. Not misplaced. Deleted. By Kim." Stephen's mouth opened. She what?" "You heard me," Jerome said, voice now low and lethal. "And you know what else I found? A long list of complaints tied directly to her. All of them ignored. Dismissed. Buried." Stephen paled, his lips moving silently as if searching for a prayer. "Stephen," Jerome said with a bitter chuckle, "you've had every opportunity to fix this. Every complaint, every red flag, you ignored them. You buried them." "I thought she just needed more training," Stephen offered weakly. "Training?" Jerome laughed. "She's not a confused intern who forgot the login password. She's poison, and you let her spread." Stephen looked like he wanted to crawl under his desk. Jerome shook his head. You know what's going to happen next, Stephen barely whispered. No, sir. You're going to walk out there, Jerome said, pointing toward the lobby, and you're going to fire her. Right now, in front of everyone. Stephen's face went white. But in front of... Now, Stephen. Before I fire you too. Stephen looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, wind howling, knees shaking, staring down into the void. But, Mr. Wilson, Jerome raised a hand. Don't stall. Don't negotiate. You've had months, years to take action. Now you've got minutes. Stephen hesitated for a breathless moment longer, then stood up like a reluctant executioner and walked toward the door. His hand hovered over the knob. He looked back one last time as if pleading for mercy without saying the words. Jerome simply nodded toward the lobby. Out he went, and Jerome followed. The tension in the lobby could be cut with a knife. Guests had stopped pretending not to listen. The front desk clerks stood frozen in place. Even the bellboy still fiddling with his cap had stopped all movement. It was the stillness before a storm. Stephen approached Kim. She looked up, wide-eyed. Mr. Lane, he didn't answer, not with words. He took a breath, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a folded document. Jerome had emailed it moments earlier, an immediate termination letter. Kim Stevens said, voice brittle. You're dismissed, effective immediately. The words dropped like stones. Kim blinked. Wait, what? You're fired, she laughed, a dry, disbelieving sound. Wait, is this a joke? Stephen shook his head. No joke. Kim's face twisted. I didn't do anything wrong. Jerome stood behind the crowd, arms crossed, watching silently. You deleted a guest's reservation, Stephen said. You targeted a customer. You lied. And we have the system logs to prove it. You can't, Kim's voice cracked. You seriously can't do this in front of everyone. I can, Stephen replied, and I am. Guests had stopped pretending now. They watched openly. Phones were subtly raised. A couple of guests whispered to each other. The story was writing itself in real time. You don't understand, Kim cried. He was rude. He made me uncomfortable. Jerome stepped forward just enough for her to see him clearly. Kim's breath caught in her throat, because she recognized something in his eyes, now authority, and the chilling realization of who he really might be began to set in. You're lucky, Jerome said, his voice quiet but razor sharp. All you're losing is your job. Stephen gestured toward the side exit. Security will escort you out. Kim opened her mouth to protest again, but nothing came out. Her voice betrayed her. Her anger turned to panic, her panic to silence. She grabbed her purse, rough, defiant, and stormed toward the exit. As she passed Jerome, she cast one last hateful glare over her shoulder. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He smiled, not out of cruelty, out of certainty, because justice had been served. But as the door shut behind her, something lingered in the air, or a hollow echo of something unresolved. Jerome's smile faded, not because he regretted it, but because he knew this was just one piece of a much bigger rot. Kim was gone. But what about the system that let her thrive? He turned to Stephen, who stood there sweating bullets. I handled it, Stephen muttered, almost trying to convince himself. No, Jerome said. I handled it. You just stood there looking constipated. Stephen gave a weak laugh. Jerome didn't. You know, Jerome added, his tone cold. I could fire you too. Stephen's face drained of all color. Mr. Wilson, I swear, Jerome cut him off. You swore a long time ago. When I hired you, you swore to uphold the values of this brand, of this company, of me. Stephen looked at his shoes. Jerome sighed. Let me spell it out for you. He turned to the stunned staff behind the desk, now clearly aware that this wasn't just some irate customer. They were looking at the boss. Listen up, Jerome said, his voice loud enough to fill the entire lobby. This hotel is being shut down immediately. Every guest will be compensated, every complaint reviewed, every employee re-evaluated. He looked each of them in the eyes. If you can't cut it, you're gone. That's not a threat. That's a standard. A young clerk, barely in his 20s, stepped forward timidly. Do you work for corporate? Sir Jerome turned to him, grinned. Something like that. Then he picked up the hotel phone and dialed a direct line. It rang once. Connected. This is Wilson, he said. Shut it down. Full audit. Effective now. Gasps, murmurs. A woman covered her mouth. The young clerk's eyes grew wide. Stephen looked like he might faint. And then, finally, it hit them. One of the clerks whispered, "You're Jerome Wilson." Jerome pocketed the phone, smiled again. "Yeah," he said, "I'm that Jerome Wilson." The silence that followed was thunderous. No one moved, no one breathed. The revelation cracked through the room like lightning splitting the sky. Employees who moments ago dismissed him now stared as if they'd seen a ghost, or worse, a god they hadn't realized they'd just cursed. Jerome stood still for a moment, letting the weight of recognition settle into their bones, letting it marinate, letting every single person present truly absorb the gravity of what just happened. And then, with effortless calm, he straightened his jacket and walked toward the elevator. No security detail, no entourage, just power. Undeniable, unmistakable, unspoken. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime and he stepped inside. Behind him, the lobby buzzed with whispers that would echo for years. "Did you see that? That was him, the actual Jerome Wilson. He owns the entire chain. Oh my God. Kim is done." As the doors slid shut, Jerome didn't flinch. He simply smirked. Perfect. By the time the elevator brought him back to his suite, a proper one this time, his phone was already buzzing with activity. Texts, missed calls, emails, most from corporate, some from members of the board, and of course one from Stephen Lane. He ignored them all, let them wait, let them sweat. He poured himself a glass of water, sat at the sleek glass desk near the window, and opened his laptop again. The glow of the screen reflected in his eyes as he re-entered the system, not as a customer this time, not as a mystery guest, but as the man in charge. The first order of business, Kim blacklisted. Not just fired, not just dismissed. Blacklisted, a permanent record across every property under his name, luxury or boutique from Manhattan to Maui. She wouldn't just be removed from the schedule, she'd never set foot in another one of his lobbies again. And then he moved on. To Stephen, the man had been given chance after chance. Every time a complaint came in, he dodged it. He smoothed it over. He did nothing. His leadership had been a warm blanket of mediocrity laid over a festering pile of arrogance and disrespect. Stephen was hanging by a thread, and Jerome was holding the scissors. Still, he paused. He clicked into the guest feedback database. If anything would confirm just how deep the damage went, it would be the voices of the people this hotel was supposed to serve. He scrolled, and it was worse than he imagined. Guests ignored, families mistreated, solo travelers made to feel unwelcome. Notes of racism veiled behind vague corporate phrasing. Apologies without action, systems manipulated to hide bad reviews. This wasn't just negligence, this was betrayal, a betrayal of everything he built. Jerome felt it deep in his chest, not as anger, but as purpose. Cold-focused purpose. Every guest who had been mistreated, he made a list. They were going to be refunded in full, given complimentary upgrades for future stays, personal apologies, and platinum status permanently. Because that's how you rebuild trust, not with platitudes, but with action. The knock at the door was soft, hesitant. Jerome already knew who it was. He didn't move at first. Let him wait. Then he walked slowly across the suite, opened the door, and leaned casually against the frame. Stephen stood there, looking like he'd seen the ghost of his own career. His shirt was damp with sweat, his tie hung awkwardly crooked and unconvincing. "Mr. Wilson," he said weakly, "please, I had no idea." Jerome cut him off with silence. The kind that said, "You've already said too much." "That's the problem," Stephen Jerome said. "You had no idea, and that was your only job. I can fix this, sir, I swear. Did you fire Kim?" Stephen nodded, desperation seeping into every wrinkle of his face. "Yes, just like you said, in front of everyone." "Good." Jerome let a beat pass. "Then, now pack your things." Stephen's mouth opened slowly, like he wasn't sure he heard right. "What?" "You're done." Jerome's tone was final. Not a threat, a declaration. "You let rot take root under your watch. You should have cleaned it up before I had to." Stephen's face crumbled. "Please, Mr. Wilson, I need this job, my family." Jerome clapped a hand on his shoulder, firm, cold. "Relax, Steve. I'm sure there's a motel somewhere that'll appreciate your leadership style." Stephen stumbled backward, eyes wide with disbelief, and then Jerome shut the door. No more second chances, not in his empire. He walked back to his desk, took a deep breath, and sat down with the weight of 1,000 decisions on his shoulders. He wasn't angry, not anymore. He was resolved to make it right, resolved to remind every employee, every manager, and every guest what the Wilson Standard meant. Respect, service, excellence, and if anyone forgot that again, they'd be next. The night deepened, but Jerome's resolve only sharpened. While the city outside his window blinked and shimmered with 1,000 distractions, he stayed locked in. Focused. Determined. The hotel might have looked perfect on the surface, polished brass marble floors, designer scents piped through the vents, but beneath it all had been complacency, arrogance, rot. Not anymore. He opened a new file on his laptop titled simply Reconstruction Protocol. This wasn't a reaction, it was a reset. He began drafting directives for corporate urgent reforms that would sweep through every level of the company. Mandatory retraining for front desk staff. Anonymous guest audits at all properties. A new escalation system where complaints bypassed local managers and went directly to regional oversight. No more bottlenecks. No more silencing. But Jerome wasn't done. He opened another window and started reviewing the hiring data from this very property. And what he found made him grit his teeth. Nearly every leadership role was filled by someone who'd been grandfathered in, not based on merit but comfort. People who'd known how to maintain, not innovate. People who took shortcuts, hired friends, ignored warning signs. People who managed but didn't lead. No wonder Kim thrived here. No one had the spine to hold her accountable. Jerome made note of every manager, every department head, every record of ignored infractions or suppressed reviews. By the time he was done, there was a list of 12 names, 12 people who had to go. Tomorrow they'd be called in. Evaluated. One by one, and unless they showed a damn good reason to stay, they'd be out the door just like Stephen. Jerome rubbed his eyes, then stood and walked to the window. Below the hotel's driveway gleamed under floodlights. A few guests wandered in and out, unaware of the tidal shift that had just occurred above them. But it was coming. The change. The reckoning. And it would be swift. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Denise, his head of global operations. Just got your audit order. Full support. Want me on site tomorrow? He smiled. Yes, 6 a.m. Bring HR security and PR. No delays. He sent the message and stared out into the night. This wasn't just about one hotel, it was a wake-up call to every hotel with his name on the door. Because a name like Wilson didn't just represent ownership, it represented standards. Jerome turned back to his desk and began drafting a personal letter addressed to every guest who had filed a complaint in the last 12 months at this location. He didn't delegate it, didn't forward it, he wrote it himself. Each one began with a variation of the same 3 words, I'm truly sorry. He apologized not just for what happened, but for the fact that it was allowed to happen. He promised a better future, and unlike the empty gestures they were used to, Jerome attached real proof, free lifetime VIP access, a direct customer service contact, and his own signature. Because redemption doesn't come from hiding, it comes from stepping into the mess and owning it. By the time the sky began to shift from midnight blue to early gray, Jerome had worked through every complaint, every incident, every policy that needed rewriting. He'd not just cleaned house, he'd rebuilt the damn foundation. And when the sun finally rose above the city skyline, it didn't just mark the start of another day, it marked the start of a new chapter. One where no guest would be ignored, one where no employee would be shielded by silence, and one where every person in that empire from janitor to general manager would know his name. Not just because it was on the sign, but because it meant something. Jerome closed his laptop, leaned back in his chair, and exhaled. The hotel would be better. The business would be stronger. And the next time some front desk clerk looked at a guest and thought they don't belong here, they'd think twice, because now everyone knew who the hell Jerome Wilson was.